So I'm a guy living in the UK. I'm from a small town in Wales, albeit not the tiny villages that most people seem to imagine. My town is a popular holiday destination along the coast of Wales. This isn't overly relevant to the story, but I just thought I would give everyone some context. So my story started when I was around 15 years old. I was dating this girl from about 2 towns over. I would usually ride the train to hers and back, but this one night her family wasn't supposed to be home, and we were kind of being watched by her brother, who was around 19 or 20 at the time. Pretty chill dude. The plan was for me to stay the night. We were up late playing on the Wii, but her parents unexpectedly came home. I never got along with her mother, and the whole thing kind of got heated, and I was kicked out of the house and told I couldn't stay. This happened at about 2 a.m. I didn't want to call my own parents. I was worried about waking them up. My mother is a very strict woman, so I began the long trudge home. It was roughly about an hour and a half worth of walking, so I was expecting to be home around 4:30ish. So I walked down this weird concrete stretch just a bit above the beach. I'm not exactly sure what you would call this path, but I stopped after about half an hour of walking, as there's a public toilet which is kind of run down but also open 24 hours. But after the length of the walk and 3 bottles of Coca-Cola throughout the night, I was desperate. I was expecting the bathroom to be empty, or maybe have a homeless dude sleeping in it. I don't know, but whatever my expectations were, they were wrong. There was a guy using the urinal. This guy looked to be in his mid to late 50s, a little on the overweight side, but not extremely so. He had gray, messy-ish hair, but other than that, just looked like a regular guy. He definitely didn't look homeless. I remember that he made a quick joke about something, although I don't remember what. I do remember politely laughing though, because far be it from me to make anybody willing to converse in a public restroom at 3 a.m. feel awkward in any sort of way. I did my business and left. Well, after about another 15 minutes of walking, the weather got pretty bad. It started to rain heavily, and the wind was beginning to pick up. I seem to remember that this was around November, so it was pretty cold out. So I'm walking, and this car drives by. It then beeps its horn at me and pulls over just in front of me. I'd assumed that it was somebody that I might know, but I couldn't think who might be out at this hour. I went over to the car, and it happened to be the dude from the toilet inside. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him. He said that was a long walk, and I couldn't be expected to walk all that way in this weather, so he offered me a lift. In hindsight, I know that I should have refused, but the weather was bad, and at the time, he wasn't giving off any sort of weird vibes. The drive took about 15 minutes, maybe 20 at the most. But the longer I was in the car with him, the more I started to get those vibes that there was something off about this guy. He was telling me that his best friend was this 14-year-old lad who stays over at his house a lot. They drink together, and if I ever wanted to join, I was welcome to. He was asking me some really invasive questions as well. I don't fully recall what they were. I just remember it's not the kind of questions you ask to someone that you're giving a simple lift home to. Anyway, we got to the street around the corner from my place, and I asked him to just drop me off there. I told him my house wasn't accessible by road, and that I would walk the rest of the way. He gave me his number and told me to give him a ring when I got back to my house safely, as he wanted to make sure I got home okay. I asked him what his name was, as at this point, through our conversation, he knew mine. He just said Pete. I said, Pete what? My phone wants a surname. He wouldn't tell me though. He just kept saying, just call me Pete. I'd later learned that Pete was a fake name altogether. Anyway, about 10 minutes later, I got into my house and texted him, just to let him know that I was home safe. Probably a bad decision, but back then, I was full of bad decisions to be honest. The next day came and I was expecting everything to go back to normal. It didn't, because I stupidly gave Pete my number when I texted him. I started to get texts from him every morning, basically just saying good morning to me and wishing me a great day. I replied to the first few, and then began to ignore them, because that's weird, right? He then started to ring me every single morning. I would ignore most of his calls, but He would often repeatedly call until I would answer. He was sending me these texts inviting me over to his house for some drinks. He kept telling me he'd just gotten himself a pool table and wanted me to come and play it with him. He was telling me a story of a friend he was playing pool with, the 14-year-old that I was talking about, and accidentally let slip that the guy called him John. I collared him about this, said, "But I thought your name was Pete." He said, "Oh no, my friend's name is John." I said, "You just said your friend called you John, and you told me your friend was called Tom." He said, "Oh well, some people call me John. It's kind of like a nickname, but his name is John too." He hesitated saying this, and it kind of clicked that he was telling me a bunch of lies. I kept refusing the offer, but he kept asking. After a while, my mom wanted to know who this dude who kept texting me and ringing me was. I told her, and she called him herself, from her own phone, telling him that if he carried on texting and ringing me, she would be calling the police. I didn't get any more texts from him after that, but it didn't end there. I had a routine, you see, and he knew it. I just about always walked my dog at 4:30 every afternoon, and I'd play with her for about 40 minutes on the field at the end of my street, right near where he had dropped me off. I started to notice his car pulling up there within 5 minutes of me getting there with my dog. He had tinted windows, but I would notice that the car lights were left on and the engine was always running. I recognized the car. I would occasionally notice the car door open and a large flash from that direction as if someone were snapping pictures. I started to alter the time that I walked my dog, but he would eventually figure that out too and start showing up either earlier or later to coincide with when I was walking with her. This went on for months, and I never mentioned it to anyone. But one day, it all just stopped. He stopped pulling up at the side of the field. I never saw his car anymore. No texts or phone calls from him. It all just came to a halt. I ended up getting a new phone after about a year and had that for another 2 years. I dug out my old phone when I was around 18 or 19 after my aforementioned dog passed. I had some old pictures and videos of her on that phone and wanted to transfer them over to my computer so that I always had them with me. I turned on my phone, which had been turned off for several years now, still having the old SIM in it. That's when I got the final message from Pete. It was a strange one, and was about 14 months old at the time. It said something along the lines of, "Hi, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I just thought you should know that over New Year, I was diagnosed with an illness, and I've been told that I don't have long left to live. You were a good friend in the short time we knew each other. I live at XYZ address, and would really appreciate it if you could come around just so I can have one last chat with you. I've got some beers in the fridge, and if it gets too late, you can stay the night. Just drop me a call when you want to come around so that I can get everything in order. See you soon." I have no idea if Pete or John or whatever his name was genuinely ill, or if he was just trying to lure me over to his house. I never went to the address that he sent me. I never responded to him or heard from him since then. I know that this story might seem anticlimactic to some, but if you live through weirdness like that in a small community such as my own, it definitely sticks with you. I know now what I knew then though. Aside from getting in his car late that stormy night, I learned pretty quickly that I didn't want to be alone with this guy. The fact that he thought, or at least said, that we were friends is totally off base. I mean, why would a man in his 50s want a teenage friend, if not to do some really strange things to them? I might have been made of bad decisions back then, but I'm glad I only have a story to share because of them, instead of something far more terrifying. I'm a 34-year-old male, and a few years back, I had an extremely stressful week at work. So I decided on a whim that I'd book a cabin on Airbnb. Very last minute, same night. Me and my dog packed up, and I drove up about an hour and a half away. I stopped along the way and got a bottle of wine in a town about 30 minutes from the cabin. Then I went and grabbed food at a restaurant a mile down the road. Very small town vibes. I ended up getting to the cabin at around 7:45. just enough light out to start a fire, which I did. The cabin was down a gravel road that was about a 5-minute drive from the main road. It was a pretty secluded feeling, even though in comparison to some actually secluded spots, this one wasn't so. It was only about a 20-minute drive from the nearest gas station and civilization. There was no cell service near the cabin though. It stopped about a minute down the road in. I didn't mind that though, because it was nice to unplug and decompress. The reviews of the place were all great. It had electricity and a clean, updated bathroom, microwave and fridge. Nothing fancy, but again, clean and managed. It had a nice front porch to sit on, and there were windows on every wall of the building to see out into the woods around it. The driveway itself came up from the back side of the cabin and stopped completely alongside the right of it. My dog and I sat around the fire until about 11, maybe 11:30. I eventually put it out, head inside. Now I'm in bed with my dog just putzing around on the phone. The thing is, every few minutes, my dog keeps alerting me to noises that she's hearing outside. After the first few jolts, I found it annoying, but I just took it as the woods doing their thing. About 45 minutes into lying in bed, I hear this light knock at the door. To say that I was fucking terrified is the understatement of the year. My heart fucking dropped into my gut. I didn't immediately answer it, and I heard a light knock again about 30 seconds later. Now I found myself wondering if something is wrong with the Airbnb, and because there's no cell service, maybe the owner couldn't get to me? Did I not notice that the place was on fire? I don't know, and in this scenario, all of these ideas run through your head pretty fast. The door itself was solid and locked, but there was a window to the right of it that showed the porch. I turned the porch light on and peeked my head in the window, only to see a guy standing there. He didn't seem scary necessarily. He may have been drunk, but I couldn't quite call it. He also wasn't trying to smash down the door or screaming belligerently. The guy immediately saw me though. The windows were like mad old and pretty shitty, so I could tell that he'd be able to hear me even though it was closed. I said, "What do you want?" That's when he motioned his head toward the door, almost as if signifying he wanted to come into the cabin. I said, "Why?" with an attitude now, because who the fuck is this guy? Without taking a moment to think or even evaluate the situation any further, he says, "For sex." Now in my mind, I'm like, what? I immediately blurt out, "Yeah man, that's not gonna happen, and you need to leave right now. I have a GPS cell phone, and I won't hesitate to call the cops." I didn't have a GPS phone, but I've always thought of myself as a fast thinker. I hoped it would scare him off, and he quickly turned around and left the porch. Now, the cabin was mostly one open room. I laid back down in the bed, heart still pounding. I didn't know if he was going to go get a gun or something to try to break in with. Directly across the bed for me is a window that looks out onto the driveway. I can see the running lights that turn on when your car doesn't have the lights actually on, and I could see them backing away from the property. I laid in bed in a fear-based state for about 3 to 4 minutes, honestly thinking of stuff that I had next to me that I could use as a weapon. It was COVID time, so I had rubbing alcohol and a lighter right there on my bedside table. My plan was, if this man got in somehow, I was going to light him on fire. I got up after a few minutes, went and pushed a dresser and chair in front of the door. The cabin was elevated, so I wasn't terribly worried about the windows, except for the one that opened to the porch. I laid back down in bed, lights off, fully terrified, and wide awake until the sun came up. That guy never came back. I packed up and left as soon as it was bright enough to see. Then I messaged the Airbnb owner as soon as I got cell service. They said that nothing like that had ever happened, and they even offered to help me file a police report. I didn't take them up on that because I live far away, and now that I had some distance from the situation, it felt as if it was likely a one-off thing. But I still have questions to this day. 1. How did he know I was there? All I can think is that he followed me from the small town that I'd stopped in about 20 minutes away. I am a gay man, but I'm not necessarily feminine presenting, although I suppose if you have the eye, you'd be able to tell. I'm assuming the locals must know there's an Airbnb out there too. And two, how did he manage to get his car down that road so quietly and with no lights on? Is it possible that he pushed it the last bit down the driveway? Did I really not notice the running lights? It was pretty quiet except for woodland noises, and I didn't hear anyone pull up, no doors close, and I didn't hear anybody walk up to the cabin. This whole situation is one that I just wanted to leave behind me, but there are nights where all I can do is think about this odd encounter. I don't lose sleep over it now, but I did that one night, and if I'm being honest, I don't really find the tranquility and stillness of being in the woods very appealing anymore. I didn't realize I had buried this memory until recently, when something completely random brought it rushing back. And once it did, I couldn't stop thinking about it. This is easily the most terrifying experience of my entire life, and I think it shaped the way I see the world more than I ever understood. The trigger came from a TV show. A few months back, I was watching the first season of The Sinner. If you've seen it, you probably remember the opening. The main character suddenly snaps and starts violently stabbing a man. This all happens in the first couple minutes of the show, so I don't feel as if I'm spoiling anything here. But the moment that I saw that scene, my stomach dropped. I'm a huge horror fan. I'm the kind of person who can watch the goriest, most disturbing movies without even blinking. Yet that one scene hit me in a way nothing else ever had. I felt sick. A few episodes later, I had to stop watching entirely. I was at a friend's house and started feeling trapped, panicky. I made up an excuse to go home, but that feeling stuck with me for days. And because I'm the kind of person who can't leave things unexplained, I started digging into why it affected me so badly. I kept replaying that scene over and over in my head, and then, out of nowhere, I remembered. This story happened when I was 11 years old. Back in 2004, my mom was working as a paralegal at a family law firm. One night, she needed to grab some case files from the office. This wasn't exactly unusual. Things in the legal world have a tendency to come up last minute. It was around 7 p.m. when she asked me to come along for the ride. I remember thinking it was a bit late, but it wasn't a big deal to me. We lived in a really nice area, a quiet, safe neighborhood where nothing bad ever really happened. I bring that up because what happened next didn't feel like something that could happen where we lived. When we pulled into the office parking lot, my mom didn't get out of the car right away. I was in the back seat reading, typical only child stuff, and I barely noticed. But after a few minutes, I asked her why we were just sitting there. She said quietly that when we pulled in, there was a man walking away from the building who walked to his car parked right behind us. He then started his car, turned the lights on, but he didn't pull out. He's just sitting there, waiting. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were on a call. Maybe they just finished their own legal meeting. They didn't seem threatening, but my mom had a feeling, so we waited. 5 minutes goes by, then 10. The man's headlights were still on, shining directly into our car. My mom kept glancing into the rearview mirror. And finally, she turned to me and said, "Let's just go get the files and get out of there fast." Okay, here we go. We got out and started walking quickly toward the building. I didn't realize it in the moment, but that man got out of his car and started to follow us in. My mom told me to hurry because it was, quote, freezing, her code. We jogged the last few steps to the door, and the building required a key card to enter, so she swiped hers and we went inside. I think we both felt safer once the door locked behind us. But within seconds, that man flashed his own security card and he followed us inside. My mom would later tell me that 1,000 thoughts ran through her head all at once. Maybe this guy worked there. Maybe he was some sort of client. The building sometimes hosted late-night mediation sessions, and clients were often given temporary key cards to enter after hours. so there was a chance that he had a legitimate reason to be there. But still, she felt that something was off. The moment we made it into the building, my mom started mashing the elevator button to get it to come down for us. Unfortunately, it didn't come down before that man made his way over to us, where he waited for the elevator as well. As we're standing in front of the elevator doors, this man smiled. It was kind of this overly wide, forced smile, one that didn't exactly reach his eyes, but he didn't say a word. When the elevator finally arrived, he stepped inside first and held the door open for us, obviously waiting for us to enter. That's when my quick-thinking mother made her move. She pretended to get a phone call. She put her hand up like she needed a second, then politely smiled and said, "Oh, I need to take this. We'll grab the next one. Thank you, though." Then she gently pushed me aside as the doors closed. The moment the elevator began moving, she leaned down and whispered in my ear, "There's no way we were getting in that elevator with him." I could tell from her voice that this wasn't paranoia, that she was dead serious about something. My mom wasn't going to ignore that sketchy feeling she got from this guy, so when the next elevator came down, she looked up at the display above it to make sure that the man didn't go to the same floor that we were going to. He went to 3. My mom's office is on 2. She said that we're going up, going into the office, and we'll wait there for a bit. We did just that. We rode the elevator to the 2nd floor, got off, went to her office, and locked the door behind us. We waited there 10 minutes, maybe longer, and neither of us said a word. During that time, my mom often had her ear pressed up against the door, clearly listening for any indication that there was somebody outside in the hallway. Then, when everything seemed clear, my mom opened the door, peeked into the hallway, and we made our way back downstairs, this time using the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator. Once we made it to the stairs, the only sounds we heard were our footsteps going down those concrete steps. We made our way out the side door of the building and sprinted to our car. That was it, at least for me. That night I went home thinking my mom had just been overly cautious. But years later, as a teenager, I'd ask her about that night again, and that's when she told me what actually happened. That man from the elevator had been in the building earlier that evening for a divorce and custody mediation session with his estranged wife. He didn't want the divorce. He was pushing for her to dismiss it, and apparently the session had gone badly. He stormed out halfway through after refusing to sign the custody papers. His wife, who was seemingly freaked out by his actions, decided to wait for about half an hour in the building before leaving, just to make sure that he was gone. While she waited inside, he went back to his car and sat there sobbing. That was around the time that we arrived, pulling into the parking lot as he got back into his car. According to the court records, while sitting there, the guy began doing drugs, and that was the first step towards what would happen next. Eventually, he grabbed a pair of kitchen scissors from his glove compartment. He got out and walked back towards the building. Once again, roughly at the same time as my mother and me. He followed us in. The elevator that he invited us into took him to the 3rd floor. That was where the mediation session had taken place, and ultimately where he decided to stalk his wife. When she finally left the meeting room and went to make her way towards the elevator, that's when he ambushed her. He would ultimately stab her 106 times with those scissors. The mediator from that session would actually turn into a witness at this man's trial. She had left the meeting room at roughly the same time as the wife, but instead of going to the elevator, the mediator went the opposite way down the hall towards her husband's office. He just so happened to work on the same floor. But while walking, she heard the wife scream out her name, followed by, "It's him." When the mediator ran towards the sounds of the screams, she saw the man dragging his bloody wife into the elevator. As she got closer, he resumed his attack, plunging those scissors into his wife over and over again, now right in front of the mediator's eye. There was blood everywhere, and the wife was no longer moving. When the police finally arrived, they found him still holding her body, his arm wrapped around her neck, as he choked his now deceased wife. This all happened while we were still in the building. We just didn't hear it. I believe by this point, we were already making our way down the stairwell, which, unless those sounds were coming from inside it, you weren't going to hear it through the concrete walls. Even now, this is something I can't stop thinking about. What could have happened if we stepped into that elevator? Would he have left us alone? Probably. I mean, his rage was directed at his wife, not at us. But the guy was high on meth, completely gone. Who's to say what might have set him off in that situation? My mom's quick thinking and her gut instinct kept us out of danger that night. She didn't try to rationalize this guy's weird behavior or try to be polite through it. She trusted her intuition, and that's the biggest thing I've learned from her. Women are constantly told not to overreact, not to make a scene, not to be rude. But my mom didn't care if she seemed rude that night. She cared about keeping us alive. I still think about that man's face, the way he smiled, and the way that he went on to do something so horrific just moments later. And every time I picture that elevator door closing, I think about just how close we came to potentially never making it home that night. I know I'm just a stranger on the internet posting a story to Reddit, but these types of stories hit far differently when you consider there are real people behind them. If you're interested in the media coverage and what happened during the trial, I'll leave some links in the description. Be warned though, the details are graphic and hard to get through. I encourage you to use your own discretion.